Jake Morrison had always been different from other people in his small town. While most folks spent their evenings watching TV or hanging out at the local diner, Jake would climb up to his backyard with his telescope and stare at the stars. His neighbors thought he was a bit odd, but Jake didn't mind. The night sky was his escape from the ordinary world. At 34, Jake worked as a computer repair guy during the day, fixing laptops and setting up internet connections for people around town. It wasn't the most exciting job, but it paid the bills and gave him enough free time to pursue his real passion. Every clear night you could find him in his small observatory that he had built himself behind his house. Jake lived alone in a cabin on the edge of town, surrounded by tall pine trees. He liked the quiet and the darkness that came with living away from the city lights. It made the stars shine brighter and clearer. His closest neighbor was almost a mile away, which was perfect for someone who spent most nights listening to the silence of space. On that particular September evening, the sky was unusually clear. Not a single cloud blocked his view of the cosmos above. Jake had been tracking a comet that was supposed to pass by Earth, and tonight was the best night to see it. He set up his telescope and adjusted the lens, excited about what he might discover. As he looked through the eyepiece, something caught his attention. At first, it looked like a normal shooting star streaking across the sky. Jake had seen thousands of them over the years, but this one was different. Instead of burning up and disappearing like meteors usually do, this bright light seemed to slow down as it got closer to Earth. Jake rubbed his eyes and looked again. The light was definitely slowing down, almost like it was being controlled. It changed direction slightly, moving away from the town and toward the forest that stretched behind his property. This wasn't normal meteor behavior at all. His heart started beating faster. Jake had read about strange objects in the sky, but he had never seen anything like this himself. The light continued to descend, getting brighter and more focused. It wasn't breaking apart or leaving a trail like a normal space rock would. Instead, it maintained its shape as it drifted down toward the trees. Jake watched in amazement as the mysterious light disappeared behind the tree line, somewhere deep in the forest. For a moment, everything was quiet again. Then he saw a soft glow coming from between the trees like someone had lit a campfire in the woods. But Jake knew that part of the forest well, and there were no camping areas or trails where someone would be at this time of night. He stood there for several minutes, staring at the strange glow and trying to make sense of what he had just witnessed. Part of him wanted to convince himself that it had been his imagination, or maybe just an unusual meteor that had landed in the forest. But deep down, Jake knew he had seen something extraordinary. The scientist in him was curious beyond belief. Jake had always dreamed of discovering something amazing, something that would prove that Earth wasn't alone in the universe. Could this be his chance? The glow in the forest seemed to be getting dimmer, which meant whatever had landed might not stay visible for long. Jake made a quick decision. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight, put on his hiking boots, and headed toward the forest. The path through the trees was familiar to him, since he often walked there during the day, but navigating it in the dark was much more challenging. Branches caught his jacket, and roots tried to trip him up, but he kept moving toward where he had seen the light fall. The deeper he went into the woods, the more he could smell something unusual in the air. It wasn't the normal scent of pine trees and earth. This smell was sweet and metallic at the same time, like nothing he had ever experienced before. The glow ahead was definitely getting brighter as he got closer. After about 20 minutes of careful walking, Jake reached a small clearing that he had never noticed before. In the center of the clearing, partially buried in the soft forest floor, was something that made his breath catch in his throat. It looked like a large egg made of crystal, about the size of a small car, and it was giving off a soft, warm light from within. Jake approached slowly, his flashlight shaking in his hand. The object was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Its surface was smooth and seemed to pulse gently like it was breathing. As he got closer, he could feel warmth radiating from it, even though the September night air was quite cool. He reached out carefully and touched the surface. It felt warm and smooth, almost alive under his fingertips. Suddenly, the crystal shell began to change. Lines appeared on its surface, glowing brighter than the rest of the object. The lines formed a pattern that looked almost like a door. Before Jake could step back, the crystal shell opened with a soft musical sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Inside, lying on what looked like soft, glowing fabric, was a woman. But she wasn't like any woman Jake had ever seen. Her skin seemed to give off a gentle light of its own, pale and almost translucent. Her hair was long and silver, not gray like an old person, but truly silver like moonlight. Her features were perfect in a way that seemed almost impossible, like someone had carved her from marble. She wore a simple flowing garment that seemed to be made from the same material as the inside of the crystal pod. The woman appeared to be unconscious, breathing slowly and peacefully. Jake stared at her, his mind racing to understand what he was seeing and what he should do. Everything about this situation went against logic and reason. But here she was, lying before him in a crystal vessel that had fallen from the stars. Jake looked around the empty forest, realizing that he was probably the only person who knew about this incredible discovery. He could call the police or the military, but something about the peaceful expression on the woman's face made him hesitate. She looked vulnerable and helpless, not dangerous. After several minutes of internal debate, Jake made a decision that would change his life forever. He carefully lifted the woman from the crystal pod, surprised by how light she felt in his arms. Her skin was warm to the touch, and she seemed to be in a deep, natural sleep. Carrying her as gently as possible, Jake made his way back through the forest toward his cabin. With each step, he wondered what he had gotten himself into, but he knew he couldn't leave her alone in the woods. Whatever she was, wherever she had come from, she needed help, and Jake was the only one who could provide it. Jake spent the next 3 days in a constant state of worry and wonder. He had placed the mysterious woman on his couch, covering her with his softest blankets. She looked so peaceful lying there, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was in way over his head. He had called in sick to work, telling his boss he had caught a bad flu. The lie came easier than he expected, probably because he felt like his whole world had been turned upside down. During those 3 days, Jake barely left her side. He checked her breathing every few hours, relieved each time to see her chest rise and fall steadily. Her skin still had that strange, soft glow, and her silver hair seemed to shimmer even in the dim light of his living room. Sometimes he wondered if he was losing his mind, if stress from his lonely life had finally caused him to hallucinate the whole thing. But every time he reached out and touched her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin, he knew this was real. Whatever she was, wherever she had come from, she was lying on his couch, and he was responsible for her safety. On the morning of the 4th day, Jake was sitting in his kitchen drinking coffee when he heard a soft sound from the living room. It was musical, almost like someone humming a lullaby, but the melody was unlike anything he had ever heard before. Jake rushed to the couch and found her sitting up, looking around his cabin with curious, bright eyes. Her eyes were the most beautiful thing Jake had ever seen. They were large and seemed to contain tiny stars, shifting between blue and silver depending on how the light hit them. When she saw Jake standing in the doorway, she didn't seem afraid. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him with the same curiosity he felt toward her. She opened her mouth and spoke, but the sounds that came out were nothing like any language Jake had ever heard. Her voice was melodic and flowing, like a song being sung in a different key. The words seemed to dance in the air, beautiful but completely meaningless to him. Jake realized that they had a serious communication problem. Jake pointed to himself and said slowly, "Jake. My name is Jake." He repeated it several times, tapping his chest each time he said his name. The woman watched him carefully, then pointed to herself and made a sound that was like music mixed with wind chimes. It sounded something like Lyra, but Jake wasn't sure if he was hearing it correctly. She tried to repeat his name, but it came out sounding like a melody. "JK," she sang, and even though it wasn't quite right, hearing his name and her voice made his heart skip a beat. Jake smiled and nodded, then pointed to her and attempted to repeat the musical sound she had made. His version sounded rough and clunky compared to hers, but she smiled when he tried. That smile changed everything for Jake. It was warm and genuine, reaching her star-filled eyes and lighting up her entire face. In that moment, he realized that despite their obvious differences, they were both just people trying to understand each other. Over the next few hours, Jake and Lyra worked together to build a basic way to communicate. Jake brought out paper and pencils and was amazed when Lyra immediately understood what they were for. She drew pictures with incredible skill, her hands moving across the paper like she was painting with light itself. When Jake wanted to know where she came from, he drew a simple picture of Earth and pointed up at the sky. Lyra nodded and took the pencil from him. She drew the most detailed star map Jake had ever seen, with perfect proportions and distances. Then she pointed to a specific group of stars and tapped the paper. Jake recognized the constellation immediately. It was Lyra, the same group of stars he had been studying just days before. The realization hit him like a wave. This woman, this beautiful, mysterious person sitting in his living room, had come from another star system. She was literally from outer space, and somehow she had ended up in his care. Jake felt dizzy thinking about the implications. Lyra seemed to sense his shock. She reached out and gently touched his hand, and Jake felt a strange tingling sensation, like a mild electric current. Suddenly, images flashed through his mind. Not his own memories, but hers. He saw a world with two suns, cities that floated in the air, and people who looked like Lyra moving through crystal corridors. Jake pulled his hand back, startled by the unexpected mental connection. Lyra looked sad for a moment, as if she had wanted to share more with him but understood that he wasn't ready. Instead, she went back to drawing, showing him pictures of what looked like spaceships and star maps. Through their drawings and gestures, Jake began to understand that Lyra's people were explorers. They traveled between stars, studying different worlds and the life forms that lived on them. She had been observing Earth from space, but something had gone wrong with her ship, forcing her to make an emergency landing. Jake drew pictures of the crystal pod he had found her in, and Lyra nodded sadly. She drew what looked like a much larger ship, then showed the small pod separating from it. Her drawing suggested that the larger ship had been damaged, and she had used the escape pod to reach Earth's surface safely. When Jake tried to ask if her people would come looking for her, Lyra's expression became troubled. She drew pictures of space, then made gestures that seemed to indicate a long distance and a long time. Jake got the impression that rescue might not come quickly, if at all. As the days passed, their communication improved dramatically. Lyra was incredibly intelligent and seemed to learn English at an impossible speed. Within a week, she could speak simple sentences, though her voice still had that musical quality that made everything she said sound like poetry. Jake learned that Lyra's people had evolved beyond many emotions that humans considered normal. They were logical, scientific, and focused on knowledge above all else. But being around Jake was awakening something in her that she had never experienced before. She was curious about his feelings, his reactions, and the way he cared for her without expecting anything in return. "Your people," she said one evening as they sat together looking at the stars. "They feel much. Happy, sad, fear, love. My people. We forgot these things long ago." Jake looked at her, seeing something vulnerable in her expression. "Don't you miss it? Feeling things, I mean?" Lyra was quiet for a long moment. "I did not know what I was missing until I met you," she said, softly. "Now I think Maybe my people lost something important when we stopped feeling. That night, as Jake lay in bed thinking about their conversation, he realized that his feelings toward Lorelei were becoming much more complicated than simple concern for a stranded traveler. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, and not just because she was from another planet. There was something about her curiosity, her gentleness, and her growing emotional awareness that drew him to her in ways he didn't fully understand yet. As weeks turned into a month, Jake's quiet cabin became filled with laughter and wonder in ways he had never imagined possible. Lorelei was like a curious child discovering the world for the first time, but with the intelligence of someone who had traveled between stars. Every day brought new discoveries and moments that made Jake's heart race. Teaching Lorelei about human life became Jake's favorite activity. He showed her how to cook simple meals, and she was fascinated by the way different foods could create different flavors. Her people, she explained, had long ago moved beyond the need for traditional food, sustaining themselves through more efficient means. But she found incredible joy in the simple act of tasting chocolate for the first time, her star-filled eyes widening with delight. "This is happiness you can eat," she said, savoring a piece of dark chocolate Jake had given her. Her way of describing things always made Jake smile. She saw the world through completely fresh eyes, finding magic in things he had taken for granted his entire life. Jake taught her about music, playing old songs on his guitar in the evenings. Lorelei would listen with complete attention, sometimes humming along in harmonies that were more beautiful than anything Jake had ever heard. Her voice could hit notes that seemed impossible for human vocal cords, creating melodies that made the air itself seem to shimmer. In return, Lorelei shared incredible knowledge about the universe. She drew detailed maps of star systems, explained how her people could travel faster than light, and described worlds where entire cities floated among the clouds. Jake felt like a student in the most amazing classroom imaginable, learning secrets that no other human had ever known. But it wasn't just the knowledge that drew Jake to her. It was watching Lorelei discover emotions she had never experienced before. Her people had evolved beyond feelings like joy, sadness, and love, considering them primitive and inefficient. But living with Jake was awakening something deep inside her. The first time Jake saw Lorelei cry, it broke his heart and filled it with wonder at the same time. They had been watching a movie together, a simple story about a dog who waited faithfully for his owner to return. When the sad parts came, tears began flowing down Lorelei's glowing cheeks. She touched her face in confusion, not understanding what was happening to her. "Water comes from my eyes," she said, looking at Jake with concern. "Am I broken?" Jake gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. "No, you're not broken. You're feeling sad. It means you care about what happened to the dog in the story." Lorelei stared at him with those incredible eyes. "Caring makes water come from eyes?" "Sometimes," Jake said softly. "But we also cry when we're really happy, or when we love someone so much it hurts in a good way." From that day forward, Lorelei began experiencing the full range of human emotions. She laughed until her sides hurt when Jake told her funny stories. She got excited about small things like watching the sunrise or seeing a deer in the backyard. She even got frustrated when she couldn't quite master some aspect of human behavior, which Jake found endearing. But the most significant change in Lorelei was how she looked at Jake. What had started as scientific curiosity was becoming something much deeper. She would watch him while he worked on his computer, study his face when he was concentrating, and sit closer to him when they stargazed together. Jake was falling in love too, though he tried to fight it at first. How could he fall for someone who wasn't even from his planet? Someone who might leave at any moment if her people came looking for her? But every day with Lorelei made it harder to protect his heart. The turning point came during a hiking trip in the mountains. Jake had wanted to show Lyrelay more of Earth's natural beauty, and she had been eager to explore beyond the forest around his cabin. They had been walking for hours, enjoying the scenery and each other's company, when Jake stepped wrong on a loose rock near a cliff edge. He fell about 20 feet, landing hard on a rocky ledge. Pain shot through his leg, and he could tell immediately that something was seriously wrong. His ankle was twisted at an odd angle, and every time he tried to move, waves of agony washed over him. Lyrelay appeared at the edge of the cliff above him, her face filled with an emotion Jake had never seen from her before, pure terror. "Jake!" she called down to him, her musical voice cracking with fear. "I'm okay," Jake called back, though he clearly wasn't. "Just give me a minute to figure out how to get back up there." But Lyrelay had already disappeared from view. Jake heard strange sounds from above, like wind chimes mixed with electronic humming. Suddenly, Lyrelay appeared beside him on the ledge, though Jake had no idea how she had gotten down there so quickly. Her hands were glowing with a soft, warm light. "I must help you," she said, reaching toward his injured leg. "Lyrelay." "What are you doing?" Jake asked. But she was already placing her glowing hands on his twisted ankle. The pain disappeared instantly. Jake watched in amazement as his ankle straightened itself, the swelling going down before his eyes. Warmth spread through his entire leg, and he could feel bones and muscles repairing themselves. Within minutes, his leg felt completely normal again. But when Lyrelay finished healing him, she collapsed beside him on the ledge. Her usual glow had dimmed significantly, and she looked exhausted in a way Jake had never seen before. "Lyrelay, are you all right?" Jake asked, helping her sit up against the rocky wall. She nodded weakly. "Healing uses much energy. Energy I need for other things." Jake realized what she meant. The energy she had used to heal him was probably energy she needed to repair her ship or to survive until her people found her. She had sacrificed her own well-being to save him from what might have been a minor injury. "Why did you do that?" Jake asked, though he was beginning to understand the answer. Lyrelay looked at him with those star-filled eyes, and for the first time Jake saw complete vulnerability in her expression. "Because losing you would hurt more than using all my energy," she said quietly. I think this is what you call love." Jake felt his heart stop for a moment. Here was this incredible being from another world, telling him she loved him in the most simple, honest way possible. Without thinking, he reached out and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you too," he whispered, and then he kissed her. Her lips were warm and soft, and kissing her felt like touching starlight. When they broke apart, Lyrelay smiled with pure joy, and her glow returned slightly, as if love itself was giving her energy. That night, as they made their way back to the cabin, Jake realized that his life had become something he never could have imagined. He was in love with someone from the stars, and somehow, impossibly, she loved him back. But even as happiness filled his heart, Jake couldn't shake the worry about what Lyrelay had told him. She had used precious energy to heal him, energy she might need to survive. And somewhere out in space, her people might be looking for her, ready to take her away from him forever. For now, though, walking hand in hand under the same stars she had fallen from, Jake decided to focus on the miracle of their love rather than the uncertainty of their future. The message came on a quiet Tuesday morning while Jake was making breakfast, and Lyrelay was sitting by the window, watching birds in the backyard. She had become fascinated by how the small creatures could fly without any technology, just using their natural wings. Jake loved watching her discover these simple pleasures of Earth life. Suddenly, Lyrelay went completely still. Her eyes, which had been bright with curiosity moments before, became distant and unfocused. A soft humming sound filled the air around her, and Jake could see faint lights dancing across her skin. "Lyrelay, what's happening?" Jake asked, dropping his coffee mug in his rush to get to her side. She held up one hand to stop him from coming closer, her expression intense with concentration. The humming grew louder, and Jake realized she was receiving some kind of communication from space. His heart sank as he understood what this probably meant. After several minutes, the lights faded and Lyralay's eyes focused on Jake again. But instead of her usual warm smile, her face was filled with a sadness that made Jake's chest ache. "They found me," she said quietly. "My people. They're coming." Jake felt like the ground had disappeared from under his feet. He had known this. Day might come, but living with Lyralay for the past 2 months had made him hope that maybe, somehow, they could stay together forever. When? Was all he managed to say. 3 of your days, Lyralay replied, moving closer to him. "They're worried about me. I've been gone much longer than any mission should take. They think something terrible has happened." Jake took her hands in his, feeling the familiar warmth of her touch. "What did you tell them?" Lyralay looked down at their joined hands. "I told them I was safe, but I didn't tell them about you. They wouldn't understand." Over the next few hours, Lyralay explained more about her people and why this was such a complicated situation. Her species had evolved beyond personal attachments thousands of years ago. They saw emotions like love as weaknesses that held back progress and clouded judgment. To them, Lyralay's feelings for Jake would seem like a sickness that needed to be cured. "They'll want to take me home and fix what they think is wrong with me," she said as they sat together on the porch that evening. "They have ways to remove emotions, to make me like I was before." Jake felt anger rise in his chest. "They can't just erase who you've become. You're not broken, Lyralay. You're more alive now than you've ever been." "I know that," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "But they don't see it that way. To them, I've been contaminated by primitive human feelings." The word primitive stung Jake more than he expected. "Is that what you think? That loving me makes you primitive?" Lyralay turned to face him, cupping his face in her glowing hands. "No, Jake. Loving you has made me complete. My people think they evolved past the need for emotions, but I think we just forgot how to feel. You've taught me that feelings aren't weaknesses. They're what make life worth living." That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what they should do. He could ask Lyralay to stay with him, but what kind of life would that be for her? She would be cut off from her people, her technology, everything she had ever known. She would be trapped on a planet that was primitive compared to her home world. But the thought of losing her was unbearable. Jake had never felt this way about anyone before. Lyralay had brought magic into his ordinary life, showing him wonders beyond his imagination. More than that, she had made him feel truly loved for the first time in his adult life. The next morning brought another complication. Jake was in town buying groceries when he overheard a conversation at the hardware store that made his blood run cold. "Strangest thing," old Pete was saying to the store owner. "My nephew works up at that government facility outside the city. Says they've been tracking some kind of unusual energy readings coming from this area. Got some fancy equipment pointed right at our valley." Jake's hands shook as he paid for his items. Government scientists with energy-detecting equipment could only mean one thing. Someone had noticed the unusual activity around his property. Lyralay's presence, her healing abilities, maybe even her communications with her people, had left traces that technology could detect. When Jake got home, he found Lyralay in the backyard, sitting in the grass and looking up at the sky. She seemed to be listening to something he couldn't hear. "We have a problem," Jake said, sitting down beside her. He told her about what he had heard in town. Lyralay nodded sadly. "I know. I can sense their scanning equipment. They're getting closer to finding us." "What do we do?" Jake asked. "We run," Lyralay said simply. Or we hide, or... She paused, looking at Jake with an expression he couldn't read. Or we trust them. Trust who? The government agents? Your people, Lorelei said. Humans. Maybe it's time to stop hiding what I am. Jake stared at her. Lorelei, if the government finds out about you, they'll take you away. They'll study you, maybe hurt you. I can't let that happen. And if I go back with my people, they'll erase everything I've learned about love and feeling, she replied. Either way, I lose what matters most to me. That evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Lorelei made a confession that changed everything. Jake, there's something I haven't told you about my people, she said. We weren't always the way we are now. Thousands of years ago, we were like humans, full of emotions, creativity, love. But we decided those things were holding us back from becoming perfect. She paused, her star-filled eyes reflecting the orange light of the setting sun. We became very advanced, very logical, very efficient, but we also became empty. We stopped creating art, stopped writing music, stopped falling in love. We just existed, learning and exploring, but never really living. Jake listened carefully, sensing that she was building up to something important. Since I've been with you, I've been sending reports back to my people about human civilization. But I haven't just been telling them about your technology or your societies. I've been telling them about your feelings, your art, your capacity for love and sacrifice. What did they say? Jake asked. Lorelei smiled for the first time in days. Some of them are curious, especially the younger ones who have heard old stories about what our people used to be like. They want to know more about these emotions I've been describing. Jake felt a tiny spark of hope. So maybe some of your people would understand about us? Maybe, Lorelei said. But there's only one way to find out. She turned to face him fully, taking his hands in hers. Jake, I want to make a choice that no one from my people has made in thousands of years. I want to choose love over logic. I want to stay here with you and show both our peoples that emotions aren't weaknesses to be evolved past, but strengths to be celebrated. Jake felt his heart racing. What are you saying? I'm saying that when my people arrive tomorrow, I'm going to tell them everything. About you, about what I've learned, about how love has made me stronger, not weaker, and I'm going to ask them to let me stay. Jake pulled her close, holding her tight against his chest. And if they say no? Lorelei pulled back to look at him, and Jake saw determination burning in her star-filled eyes. Then I'll choose you anyway. I'd rather be a primitive human with you than an emotionless alien without you. As night fell and the stars came out, Jake and Lorelei held each other close, knowing that tomorrow would change their lives forever. Whatever happened, they would face it together, their love stronger than the space between worlds. The morning of the third day arrived with a clear blue sky that seemed to mock the anxiety in Jake's heart. He and Lorelei had barely slept, spending most of the night holding each other and talking about their hopes and fears for what was coming. Now, as they sat on the porch drinking coffee and watching the forest, everything felt surreal. How will you know when they arrive? Jake asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lorelei pointed to the sky. I'll feel them before you see them. Their ship creates vibrations that I can sense from far away. As if summoned by her words, Lorelei suddenly went rigid in her chair. She closed her eyes and tilted her head, listening to something Jake couldn't hear. They're here, she whispered. Jake looked up at the sky but saw nothing unusual. Then, slowly, the air above the forest began to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The shimmer grew larger and more defined until Jake could make out the outline of something massive hovering silently above the trees. I can't see it clearly, Jake said, squinting at the distortion. They're using light-bending technology, Lorelei explained. Your people call it cloaking. But watch. The shimmer began to fade, and Jake's jaw dropped as an incredible ship became visible. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. A graceful, crystalline vessel that seemed to be made of the same material as the pod where Jake had first found Lyrelay. The ship was easily the size of a football field, floating silently above the forest like something from a dream. "Jake," Lyrelay said, standing up and taking his hand. "Whatever happens next, I want you to know that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You taught me what it means to be truly alive." Before Jake could respond, a beam of soft light descended from the ship. But instead of taking Lyrelay away, the light formed a bridge of solid energy that stretched from the ship to Jake's backyard. 3 figures began walking down the light bridge, moving with the same graceful steps that Lyrelay had. As they got closer, Jake could see that they looked similar to Lyrelay. Tall, pale, with that same inner glow, but their expressions were cold and distant in a way that Lyrelay's had never been, even when she first arrived. The leader of the group was a woman who looked older than Lyrelay, though Jake was learning that aging worked differently for her. People. She wore flowing robes that seemed to be made of captured starlight, and her silver hair was arranged in an elaborate style that suggested high rank. "Lyrelay," the woman said, and even though she spoke in their musical language, Jake somehow understood the words. He realized that Lyrelay was using her abilities to translate for him. "Commander Zara," Lyrelay replied, her voice respectful but not submissive. "Thank you for coming to retrieve me. We were concerned when your mission extended far beyond its planned duration," Commander Zara said, her star-filled eyes studying Lyrelay with scientific interest. "Our scans indicate that you've undergone significant changes. We're here to bring you home for evaluation and treatment." Jake stepped forward, his heart pounding but his resolve firm. "Excuse me, but Lyrelay doesn't need treatment. She's perfectly fine." The 3 aliens turned their attention to Jake for the first time, and he felt like he was being examined under a microscope. Commander Zara's expression showed mild curiosity, but no warmth. "You are the human she has been observing," Commander Zara said. "Interesting. You appear to be a typical example of your species, yet our readings suggest an unusual level of neural activity in Lyrelay's presence." "He's not a specimen," Lyrelay said firmly, moving to stand beside Jake. "His name is Jake, and he's the person I love." The word love seemed to hit the 3 aliens like a physical blow. They stepped back slightly, their expressions shifting, from curiosity to something that looked like concern or even fear. "Lyrelay," Commander Zara said carefully. "Love is a primitive emotion that we evolved beyond millennia ago. Exposure to it can be dangerous to our mental stability. We need to get you away from this contamination immediately." Jake felt anger flare in his chest, but Lyrelay squeezed his hand in warning. She had a plan, and she needed him to trust her. "Commander," Lyrelay said, her voice taking on a formal tone Jake had never heard from her before, "I request permission to present evidence that challenges our current understanding of emotional evolution." The 3 aliens exchanged glances. Commander Zara looked intrigued despite herself. "What kind of evidence?" Lyrelay stepped forward, her inner light growing brighter. "For 2 months, I have been experiencing the full range of human emotions. Instead of making me weak or confused, these emotions have enhanced my abilities in ways I never thought possible." She gestured toward Jake. "When this human was injured, my concern for him allowed me to access healing abilities that I never knew I possessed. When I felt joy at his laughter, my energy levels increased beyond normal parameters. When I experienced love, my understanding of the universe expanded in ways that pure logic never achieved." Commander Zara frowned. "Emotional responses are inefficient. They cloud judgment and lead to poor decision-making." "Do they?" Lorelei asked. Commander, when was the last time our people created something truly new? When did we last make a discovery that wasn't just a logical extension of existing knowledge? When did we last feel wonder at the beauty of the stars we travel between? Jake watched as doubt flickered across Commander Zara's face. The other two aliens also seemed to be considering Lyra Lee's words with genuine interest. What are you suggesting? Commander Zara asked. Lyra Lee took a deep breath. I'm suggesting that we didn't evolve beyond emotions. We just forgot how valuable they are. I want to stay here on Earth and continue studying human emotional capacity, but not as a detached observer, as someone who has learned to feel. Absolutely not, Commander Zara said immediately. The contamination could be permanent. We cannot risk— Wait, interrupted one of the other aliens, a younger-looking man with kind eyes. Commander, perhaps we should consider her findings. Our exploration missions have become increasingly routine. We gather data, but we've stopped truly discovering. The third alien, another woman, nodded slowly. I've heard the old stories about our people before the Great Evolution. They spoke of something called inspiration, of emotions driving them to create beautiful works of art and music. We haven't produced anything like that in thousands of years. Commander Zara looked troubled. You're talking about regression, about becoming primitive again. Are we primitive, Commander? Jake asked, finding his voice. Yes. Our technology is less advanced than yours, but we create music that moves people to tears. We write stories that inspire others to be better. We love so deeply that we'll sacrifice everything for each other. Is that really primitive? Lyra Lee moved closer to Jake, taking his hand. Commander, I want to propose something that has never been tried before. Let me stay here as an ambassador between our peoples. Let me continue learning about emotions while also sharing our knowledge with humans. Instead of hiding from each other, let our species learn from each other. The backyard fell silent except for the gentle hum of the alien ship overhead. Jake could see Commander Zara wrestling with the decision that could change both their worlds. Finally, the younger male alien spoke up. Commander, I volunteer to stay as well. I want to experience these emotions Lyra Lee describes. As do I, added the other woman. Our people have been stagnant for too long. Perhaps it's time to remember what we've forgotten. Commander Zara stared at her companions, then at Lyra Lee and Jake. This is highly irregular. The Council will need to approve any permanent contact between our species. Then let's ask them, Lyra Lee said boldly. But let them make the decision based on evidence, not fear. Over the next several hours, Jake's backyard became the site of the most important diplomatic meeting in human history. More aliens came down from the ship, some curious, others skeptical. Jake found himself answering questions about human nature, about love, about why people created art and music. As the day wore on, Jake noticed changes in some of the aliens. The younger ones especially seemed to be responding to the emotional energy around them. They began to smile, to show curiosity, even to laugh when Jake told funny stories about his life with Lyra Lee. By evening, Commander Zara had made her decision. We will establish a small research station here, she announced. Lyra Lee and 3 volunteers will remain on Earth to study human emotional capacity and serve as ambassadors between our peoples. In return, we will share selected technologies to help humanity advance. Jake felt tears of joy running down his face. Lyra Lee threw her arms around him, her own eyes sparkling with happy tears. There is one condition, Commander Zara added, looking directly at Jake and Lyra Lee. If this experiment is to have credibility with our people, it must be conducted properly. Lyra Lee, if you're going to study human love, you should experience it fully. Jake didn't understand what she meant until Lyra Lee started laughing through her tears. She's saying we should get married, Lyra Lee explained. She wants to study human bonding ceremonies, 6 months later, Jake found himself standing in a field filled with flowers, wearing his best suit and looking at the most beautiful bride in two worlds. Representatives from both Earth and Liralay's people had come to witness the first interplanetary wedding in history. As they exchanged vows under a sky filled with bot,